Hello everyone, my name is Matthew, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Cosmodrome Model. In this episode, we're going to take and build all of the structural portions of the model, so that next week I will be able to paint and then put on all of my little miniatures and figures on this model. Starting off, I'm going to measure out the wooden base. This model is going to be 1 foot by 2 feet long, and this wood will act as a really solid foundation so that I can put all of my styrofoam on it and not worry about it either warping, bending, or breaking. Once I've got my tape measure and marked out my specific measurements on the wood, I will then put this aside and move on to the next step. Next up, I'm going to start cutting out the foam. In order to do this, I am using a hot knife used to cut styrofoam. This is the first time I have ever used this knife, and in order to test this out, I decided to cut out the little bridge that's going to be in my model. In order to do this, I took this very long piece of styrofoam and cut it into sections about 1 8 inches long and 1 6 inches long. As you can see here, the knife works incredibly well and cuts through the styrofoam almost like butter. Doing this was satisfying, but in retrospect, I cannot recommend cutting styrofoam in a well-ventilated environment. As you will see throughout this entire video, this knife was smoking a lot just from the styrofoam. Like, I don't even know, just from cutting it, it was making a lot of smoke and just getting a lot of chemicals in the air. And I was coughing a lot, and it was not epic at all. So please, if you ever do this on any of your own projects, please do this either with a well-ventilated environment or with a really good respirator. But after getting used to the hot knife and cutting out the sections of the bridge, I then was able to test out this foam-safe super glue that I got. And I joined both of those two pieces together into basically a T, which I will then make into the bridge and attach onto my model later. The landscape of the model was the next thing to cut out of my foam. I used these big styrofoam sheets to cut out the gentle rises and detail of the landscape with my hot knife. Now you'll see when I'm cutting this out, this massive other sheet of foam that I'm basically putting all of my other foam on top of. I ended up not using this foam at all because the kind of foam I got for it was just really trash, and I ended up just not needing it for my model. Its intended purpose was to just add a little bit more depth and just thickness to the model. So, but because of what I just said, it did not work. It was a complete waste of money, so I'm just not going to use it for this model. And now if anybody needs extra foam, hit me up because I got you. While I was working on cutting the landscape out, I was really nervous and concerned with my sense of scale. In this model, my general sense of scale is 3 feet equals 1 inch. This will hopefully work for these miniatures that I'm getting, which are supposed to represent 6 foot tall individuals, but the models themselves are only 2 inches tall. And because I want this to all look good, I'm trying to make it all build to the same scale. So this part of the model process was just basically me sitting back in deep thought, trying to figure out how to get this to work. And eventually, I came up with the only solution. Screw all of that shit and just go ham. I just went and decided to cut all of these little hillsides just straight with a hot knife and try to make them look as much like the landscape I was thinking about as possible. First one I cut out was this really steep kind of hill looking thing, which you can see right here. This I left with one side perfectly flat so that I could line it up with the end of the wood and basically have or exist right there so that the model would then basically build off until the end of the wood. The second biggest piece of the landscape was this gradual slope, which I was going to put on the side with my bridge. So basically what I did, really, this took a long ass time, but what I did was just try to slide my hot knife as thinly as possible and trying to get basically the entire sheet off, but like make it as thin and as, I don't even know what the word is, but just the to make the slope as close to zero as possible. Sorry, I'm finishing up my finals, so I'm using a bunch of math terms. So yeah, basically to make the slope, if you think of it like a graph, you're trying to make the slope of the hill, basically the hypotenuse, as close to zero as possible. It's just so that the hill just kind of has a gradual increase. My deepest apologies for using all this freaking math jargon, but whatever. My finals in a week, it's whatever. But yeah, so I managed to cut this out and get it out of the foam, and then I had my two biggest pieces here. I decided to use whatever foam I had left just to cut some other rocks or just some other little small details, and just to have all of that assembled for my next step. So about a week later, I actually got around to cutting out the wood base. A bunch of my friends here are doing their own projects in my church's wood shop, and I managed to join up with them, and I used this reciprocating saw to take out the wooden base from my scrap wood. You can see here, I remeasured all of my marks just to make sure that they were measured correctly, because I did not want my base to be just out of whack. So I measured all of my things again, and then took the reciprocating saw and started cutting. And as you can see on this cut, the long cut, I got about 2/3 of the way until the boards started like folding in on each other and onto the saw blade. So my only solution for that was getting right in between the camera and the saw, so you could not see what I was doing to finish the cut. And thankfully though, I did get the cut out. So now after I finished this long cut, I lined up for my short cut, and now with an actually good camera position, I did my shortcut and got my wooden base perfectly cut, nearly perfectly cut, for my model. With my wood now cut out, I could start arranging my foam pieces onto the wood so I could start to visualize how the model would look. This was very important for me, just so I can know what my next steps would be, and if I really did want to add anything else, or to meet the grand image that I had in my head. Once I gave them a rough setup on my wood board, I took them back to my house, where I then started to glue them down and then finish up whatever other structural details I wanted. There's not really too much to say here. I literally just took my foam super glue, covered the bottom of these pieces immensely with the glue, and then just put it on my wood and held it there and let it dry. I did that for both. I ended up trimming off the long gradual slope piece. You can see here I had to trim off part of it because it hung over the board too much. But I trimmed that off, glued it down, cut out a little bit of just some little other rocks just to make it more interesting, put those where I wanted them, and then finally finished up by taking my bridge and making that look really detailed. I really like how this turned out. I ended up using a longer blade on my hot knife and cut a little like U in the top of the bridge so that it was a little bit thinner, and so you could kind of see the end of the bridge like if you imagine like two Jersey barriers on either side with this lane of the bridge for a road going down it, then attached to its support column, which I then carved little chunks out of so it looked like the concrete was kind of falling away. And once I was satisfied with that, I put some super glue on the bottom, glued it to my foam piece, and then let that dry. So now with all of my foam pieces cut out, my wood base set, and everything attached to my wood base, I decided to clean up my materials and call it good for this week. Please join me next time, where we're going to start to paint this model and make it look just like it looks like in the video games. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do all the YouTube stuff. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more of this project and just other projects that I have in the future. And with that, my name is Matthew, and have a good rest of your night.